Greetings, fellow readers. Rambling Collector here, and welcome back to another book reviewing podcast episode. Now, for the subject of this video, we're going to be changing things up a little bit more. For now, we're not going to be diving into the world of self-published authors, or even any of the more modern works, or a manga, or a comic. No. We're going to be talking about one of the old classics when it comes to horror fans as well as old literature. We're going to be talking about Thomas Harris's Red Dragon, the first book of the Hannibal Lecter book series, as well as the first Hannibal Lecter novel. So, firstly, I got to give a shout out to my friend Brevin over on Brevin's Flicks and Games for sending me this novel. He has sent me both this as well as Silence of the Lambs for review material, and I cannot honestly thank him enough, seeing as how I'm still very much new to the horror genre. And going back to this right now, I have heard of Hannibal Lecter. I heard of him mainly through pop culture osmosis. I knew of him as the famous cannibalistic serial killer. I know about the TV show, which I have not seen yet, nor have I seen any of the classic horror films revolving around Lecter, specifically Silence of the Lambs. Heck, before this, I didn't even know there were books about him. But I will say this much, though. This one was definitely an experience, and I honestly have to thank Brevin for that. Wholeheartedly, man. Like, you are a real one. For he has sent me both Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs to review for future material, and I honestly cannot wait to read Silence of the Lambs after this one. Speaking of which, I think I've ranted long enough. Let's get on with the review, shall we? So firstly, being the first book of the Hannibal Lecter series, this book does a fantastic job at introducing both our main protagonist of Will Graham, as well as our titular character of Hannibal Lecter, establishing their previous history with each other. By that meaning that Will Graham was the one who actually found out about Dr. Lecter and what he was doing, specifically about he was murdering and cannibalizing his victims, and he was the one who actually issued for Lecter's arrest and actually was the one to catch him. Which, to me, that adds a very nice little personal touch here, meaning that our protagonist knows who Hannibal is. And Hannibal, I will say he's very interesting in the fact that he's not really seen as the main antagonist of his own story here, but rather we see him in a sort of either supportive or mildly antagonistic way, where he does leak Will Graham's address, indicating the location of his wife and stepson, to our famous killer of Francis Dollarhide. But other than that, though, he more or less acts as a supporting character in a way, which is very interesting for that, because we have a very famous serial killer acting as a supporter for our protagonist. I find that very interesting, and it's a nice little look into Will Graham as well as Hannibal Lecter as characters. For instance, one of the main things that I notice here is that Will Graham seems to compare himself to Lecter, and Lecter himself seems very fascinated by Graham in a way. But it's clear from the very start that these two have a very brief and very violent history with each other, and it's interesting for that. But going to our antagonist, Francis Dollarhide, I will say he was a very interesting serial killer, to be completely honest with you, especially when, as you progress through the novel, you see more of his backstory, and therefore it is shown that Thomas Harris writes him as a broken victim of an abusive childhood. Like, for instance, his sociopathic tendencies were born from the fact that he was abandoned by his mother and left to rot in an orphanage until his grandmother found out about him, picked him up, basically adopted him, but he was essentially raised in an old nursing home in a way, constantly surrounded by older senior folks who just didn't seem all the way there. Not exactly the best household to grow up in, especially with the grandmother threatening to cut off his manhood at one point when she finds out about him exposing himself to a female childhood friend in a way, which, if you're going to be honest here, that's not exactly something I could see kids doing unless they are morbidly curious, but it's still very discomforting in a way. But seeing that, oh boy, I felt really bad for Dollarhide at first. But however, the thing is that as he's written, though, the novel never shies away from just how sick and twisted he can be, showing some of his twisted tendencies and actions. Like, when the book starts, we have two families who have been murdered already, and in some cases cannibalized. which I am going to say this right now, these books do not shy away from graphic detail. I'll say that right now. They describe how these children, these families, some of them are propped up with their dead bodies going cold and still bleeding, and he proceeds to do some very inappropriate acts to dead bodies, which I'm not going to state the name of for the sake of your all's mental constitution, but I think you all can get where I'm going with this. But it makes it even worse when we see that he has home videos of them saved because he works as a photo developer. And we learn about this through researching his backstory throughout the novel. We learn of how he was able to develop photos and whatnot, that he does it for a living. But this is how he gets the info to break into the houses of his victims. And it's very interesting that they put that in a way to show how he's able to acquire his information in a very roundabout way. Like Dollarhide, I will say, was a very interesting serial killer antagonist from the many mystery or crime novels that I've read so far, mostly revolving around James Patterson, as well as a few with Jim Butcher, and a fair few others here and there. But I will say one of the main complaints that I will have with this book is that the novel can be slow at times, and it does tend to drag on a little bit, but ultimately the payoff is well worth it in the end. Like, I will say, it does start off very slow with focusing on Will Graham, focusing on Lecter a little bit, because this is the first novel. It's going to be building up. It's going to be very slow at first. But gradually, as you go through more of the book, it builds up in speed. It adds a sense of haste to it. And that's what really enthralls you more when you learn more about the killer, but also Will himself, because Will has a tendency to visualize crime scenes as he goes, and you see just how much of a mental taxation this takes on him when he is forced to bear the burden of knowing these people who were killed. He learns more about the victims. He really inserts himself into their lives in a mental image. He creates this mental landscape, this mental picture of what the killer was doing. And Dollarhide's actions are very, very gruesome, to say the least. But more than that, though, honestly, this book really enthralls you the more you continue. And honestly, I'm really tempted to read more after this, but okay, let's get to random thoughts here. I think I'm ranging a little bit hard here. Let's keep moving. So, random thoughts here. Again, I am still very new to the horror genre as a whole. I am gradually getting more into it thanks to the influence of my girlfriend, who has constantly been a source of great info for great horror movies to check out, or even checking out some new ones. Like just recently we watched The Pope's Exorcist, which was an excellent movie. But as for Silence of the Lambs, that is one that is possibly going to have to go on my watch list, as well as on my reading list as well. And once again, I gotta give a shout out to Brevin for this one, because he was the one who sent me the copies of Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs. Now that I've read one, now I've got to read the other to see how it goes. And it's kind of interesting to me that Red Dragon is the first. It's not like founding about Hannibal as the main villain and then leading into Red Dragon. It's essentially starting with Lecter already locked up. His crimes have already been committed. He's already locked up in jail. And I find that kind of interesting, that the titular character is already imprisoned, incarcerated, whatever you want to put. He's already been locked up. He's already been caught. And now this is just showing all these copycat killers of him. And he's used for his, well, reputation as a psychologist. And I find that interesting in how they still use an old villain like this. I kind of wonder if there's more novels like this in a way. Although I'm very curious to learn more about Hannibal as a whole, I feel like I'm essentially going to be diving into a rabbit hole with that one. If I decide to really dive in, oh boy, I'm probably never going to come out the same. Why is it with every rabbit hole I always come out a little bit mentally worse? But no, going back to this though, I have an appreciation for older books in this way, because while they can tend to have a bit of fluff to them or overly dramatic creative writing, it's when you look at the older books that you see where modern literature has advanced and changed in a way to become more fast-paced. It appeals more to a modern audience, whereas for this one, it has a bit of sophistication to it. that you really have to learn about. And all these characters that we are interactive with, from Lecter to Graham to even Dollarhide, and how he himself has a human moment towards the end when he falls in love with one of his co-workers, which convinces him to possibly change his ways. And really diving into Dollarhide's psychosis there of sociopathic tendencies, though, one of the main plot points that I really enjoyed with that was that he was influenced by an actual modern-day painting that is very real, the Red Dragon painting, which, learning about that, oh boy, that was some interesting ways to look at it. And I liked how there's a parallel between Dollarhide as the Red Dragon, and he's actually haunted, or in his case, possessed, quote-unquote, by what he believes to be the dragon, which is his inner psychosis or psychopathic killer. He gives himself willingly to the dragon up until the very end, when he falls in love with a blind co-worker who can't see him, but she grows to feel attracted to him. And I found that very interesting, that he was left squirming and kind of uncomfortable and really thinking to himself, maybe I have a different choice. It's one of those bits where I really like how the killers can sometimes have that little grasp of humanity return to them a little bit, that there's always this alternate path that they can take away from their murderous ways. It's kind of interesting in a way for ways to humanize them, but even then you know that these guys have committed far too much and they are way too far gone. For a good reference here, I would say would be James Patterson's Postcard Killers. Like, the two killers, the siblings in there, were really far gone, and they knew what they were doing was absolutely sick and twisted. And I don't really think any of them really had any full-on regrets, to be completely honest with you. They were just twisted from the get-go, but it's interesting to really see the killer's perspective in a way, like we did here with Dollarhide and Red Dragon, and like we did with the siblings in Postcard Killers. I thought that was a very interesting way to do it. I kind of wonder if there's more novels like this in a way where we get both the perspective of the protagonist as well as the killer. Let me know if you guys know any of those down in the comments below. I really do want to know more about that. Anyways, I think I've ranted on enough here. Let's move on to the final score, shall we? So overall, I'd say I would give Red Dragon by Thomas Harris a solid 8 out of 10. Like I said, it does tend to drag a little due to it being an older novel, so it has a bit more of a fluffy sort of text to it. But once you really get into the spin of it, you really cannot put it down. And if you're still getting new to Hannibal Lecter, a lot of people will recommend that you either just read Silence of the Lambs straight off, but I'm going to be one of those who recommends that you read Red Dragon first, as it is chronologically the first book published. Well, not chronologically the first book of the series, it is a very good one to go off of if you really want to introduce yourself more to the world of Hannibal Lecter, and if you want to start from publishing order compared to chronological order. Overall, though, I'd say give this one a shot if you haven't already, especially if you're either a Hannibal Lecter fan, or if you did not know that he actually had novels, or if you want to know more about the world of the old horror, or if you're just a Hannibal Lecter fan, boy or girl. No judgment here. But let me know what you guys thought in the comment section down below, and if you enjoyed this review, please feel free to leave a like or comment your thoughts on it down below. Subscribe if you're interested for more. And once again, I'm going to have to give a shout out to Brevins Flexing Games here, because that man is awesome. He's provided me with some good stuff to review in the past, such as Batman and Nightfall, as well as plenty of others. Anyways, you guys, thank you so much for listening. This is Ramble Lecter, signing off for now. But if you want to see more of my other book rambles that I've done, I will leave a link to that playlist as well here at the end of this video. Or if you want to see some of the other self-published authors that I've covered to give them a shout out, I will leave a link to that playlist as well. Thank you so much for listening. This is Rambling Collector signing off, and have a great day, fellow readers. I'll see you all in the next review.